Okay, we will be reconvening to our regular meeting with one report. Upon motion of Noelia Corzo, seconded by Rebecca Hitchcock by unanimous vote, the board approved charges to immediately suspend and dismiss a permanent certificated employee. And moving on from that, we are very excited to welcome two of our students to lead us in the flag salute, Rodrigo and Roberto Beltranena. Welcome. Yeah, feel free to speak into the mic and lead us.
Okay. Do we just start?
Maybe say please stand.
Oh, please stand. Face the flag. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Thank you. And so we're very excited to have you here. I understand you're both 7th graders at North Shoreview Montessori.
Yes.
Great. So would you like to share with us your interests and then your hobbies outside of school and what you like to do in school?
Okay. So for me, my interests inside of school are learning new things and studying for tests and learning some new subjects and like learning some things that I had no idea existed. Some hobbies of mine are playing sports such as baseball, football, and basketball. And I like to play with my brother in the front yard. And sometimes we get a little bit out of hand.
Okay.
Some of my interests inside of school are learning new things every day and playing with friends at recess and lunch. Some of my interests outside of school or things I like to do outside of school are playing sports, basketball, football, baseball, with my brother.
Great. And I understand that you're both involved in stage crew.
Yes.
And playworks during lunchtime, right?
Yes.
Cool. So would you also just mind sharing who you have with you here today?
Today we have our parents, Lara Beltranena and Jorge Beltranena, and our principal, Dr. Wood, our social studies teacher, Ms. McMahon, our language arts teacher, Miss Bonnet, and our preschool teacher, Miss Hiromi.
Great, thank you so much. We're so glad you could join us tonight. So we know that you have homework and lots of things to do. So feel free to stay as long as you want. But we also understand if you want to get going.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to roll call, let the record reflect that all trustees are in attendance. And now, approval of agenda, January 30th, 2020.
I would like to ask that we pull item 7.1 for the time being. There appear to be more than one proposition related to this topic moving forward, and we may need to adjust our resolution to that. So I thought we should pull this for the moment until we are clear about what language we should be using.
Okay.
Motion to approve tonight's agenda with the removal of 7.1.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and moving on to approval of minutes. No, you turned it off.
So while the kick.
All right, someone else.
There you go.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, okay. So we are very excited to recognize the San Mateo Foster City Education Foundation Readathon. So we have Liz and Colleen here to talk to us about that.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. It was a real honor to find out you wanted to recognize the Education Foundation and our current event, the Readathon. This is the very first year we've had all 17 of our schools involved. Our friends at North Shoreview are doing a fundathon because they have a pre-existing Readathon. But we are so excited that all 17 schools, over 8,000 elementary schools, over 8,000 students are involved in the Readathon. And one of the big things we try to foster during the Readathon is this awareness that our community is so much larger than just one school, and we are super diverse, and we want children to understand that San Mateo Foster City is their home, and it's a really special place because we are so unique in our diversity and all the offerings. So we, of course, raise money to make sure all schools have some of the same opportunities, and the Readathon is a wonderful way to pull everyone together. Tonight, I have placed a poem from this book, Train of Thoughts, from a local author is being a little bit generous, but his name is Mr. Lemur. There's a couple, they were in San Francisco, I think they're in San Jose now, and they created this character, Mr. Lemur, and they've published poetry books, they run camps. So they have come to a number of our schools in the past, and they have this great book, and I've chosen a poem for each, starting with Shara. And I also want to let you know that on our Facebook page and our Instagram page, we have nightly bedtime stories, and primarily it's our board members who have taken the time to have themselves videotaped reading a bedtime story for all of our kids. So we're posting them every night, so it's like 14 nights of bedtime stories, and I hope that people will start tuning in. And I'll also post these poems that they're reading tonight on those pages. Oh, yes. Our goal for the Readathon is to read 1 million minutes. We're currently over 350,000, and our goal is to raise 100,000. Last year we raised 105, and we're at 46,000 right now. So let's keep it going. And
Do our minutes count?
we can count them.
And the time frame for the readathon? Is it 2 weeks?
Okay, so we're halfway through. It's one more week. Tomorrow will be kind of the halfway point. Shara, will you start us off?
Definitely. Okay, my poem is called Train of Thought. Come on and ride the train of thought, it doesn't matter where. To ride, you simply close your eyes or pick a spot and stare. Sometimes you'll be an engineer, sometimes you're on the ride, and on this train you'll be amazed at whom you'll sit beside. You'll sit with former presidents, you'll fly with astronauts, you'll venture with magicians as you travel through your thoughts. You'll wander in the mountains and you'll daydream by the shore, and often when you board the train, you won't know what's in store. Stop to read good writers who are witty and are fun, because that's the kind of fuel on which your train of thought will run. And if traveling makes you tired, your sleeping car includes a bed, and your train sets off to dreamland for more adventures in your head.
Mine is called Chocolate Fondue. Let's fill the biggest pot we've got with melty cherry chocolate. We'll add some flour and some spice and heat it till it bubbles twice. But fruit and berries are blasé. Let's come at this a different way. Then maybe we can write a book on new fondue that you can cook. We'll put some sushi on long sticks and get our fishy chocolate fix. We'll dip a stick of pinto beans and angry bees, but not the queens. A deviled egg, a small pot pie, a cordon bleu on toasted rye, a kosher dill, a wedge of cheese, some pork chow mein from overseas, some mustard seed, a rack of lamb, the contents of a can of Spam. We'll tame a clove of garlic's wrath by giving it a chocolate bath. Now that we're done, upon inspection, we may have gone in the wrong direction. I wonder if we ate too quick, because I suddenly feel sick. I think that we should think this through before we publish on fondue. Some things go well and some things don't. I guess we'll call our book Fondant.
Okay, Flosta by Mr. Lemur. In Fosa's lab, she made a cross between a pasta and a floss, a fibrous food that you prepare with leftovers from dental care. First drop used Flosta in a pot and stir it till it's soft and hot, then twirl it like your mom's spaghetti. It turns green when it is ready. Once it's cooked, you simply toss the Flosta with the 3-cheese sauce. It's kind of gross, but kind of neat. It tastes like what you've had to eat. And sure, it's kind of hard to chew, but it's good for your teeth and you. So how's it taste? Well, it's all right, though no one's had a second bite. Taste testers give us this report. Eat only as your last resort.
Mine is called Toucan. I am not sure when he first appeared, but there's a toucan in my beard. Now every time I try to speak, he pokes my chin with his curved beak. He pokes my chin as if to say, "Throw a little bread my way. Throw me just a little piece, and all the poking will decrease." As strange as this is going to sound, I like having this bird around. He keeps my beard clear of debris, and I, for him, am like a tree. It's not what I'd sought to arrange. My friends and neighbors think it's strange, but this is more than just exotic. I would call it symbiotic.
My poem is called 2043. What do you think you will be when it's 2043? If I were asked to make a bet, I'd say it's not invented yet, that you'll do something not yet known, like fix a whoosh or fly a cone. Perhaps you'll cure a new disease or sail a newfound planet's seas, aboard a ship that floats on air while sitting in the captain's chair. You have no plan? No need to fret. Your job's not been invented yet.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, moving on to public statements related to non-agenda topics. The San Mateo Foster City School Board cannot act upon any matter that has not been included and publicly posted on the agenda except under limited circumstances as permitted by law. The board may refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and/or action where appropriate. Please limit your statements to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Board President. We have 2 speakers on non-agenda topics. The first is Sophie Nelson, and the second is Julie MacArthur.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophie Nelson, and I am the Education Programs Associate at TheaterWorks Silicon Valley, and still remarkably nervous talking in front of a crowd somehow. We are currently celebrating our 50th season and won the 2019 Regional Tony Award. Our founder and artistic director, Robert Kelly, is celebrating his last season with us, and Tim Bond will be joining as our artistic director in July. Some exciting things happening at TheaterWorks. And we're really excited to be continuing a relationship with San Mateo Foster City School District. We are currently at Highlands Elementary with our Concepts at Play program, which is a residency program. And we want to continue to look for ways to support this community. And we have our Oscar series, which is a traveling assemblies show. We bring everything to schools. We bring the sets, we bring the costumes and the puppets and the actors who engage with students afterwards in a Q&A, and we include a study guide as well. And we've been bringing Oscar to schools around the Bay Area for 10 years, and this year we have 2 new shows. The first one is Oscar and the Big Bully Battle Part 2, which supports your conversations in schools around bullying and upstanders and bystanders, and Oscar and the Countless Costume Changes, which is all about combating gender stereotyping. And both, we hope, help to support your ongoing conversations in social emotional learning. And this is appropriate for grades K through 5, and it's super colorful and fun and silly and sweet, and there's music involved too. And Dr. Rosas was kind enough to take one of my flyers, and if you're interested, you can look us up at www.theaterworks.org, and my name is Sophie Nelson. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, trustees. I understand that the schools and community first item was pulled off the agenda for tonight, and I totally understand that, so no worries. But I would like to thank the board for their consideration on the Schools and Communities First initiative, and I would strongly encourage you to vote yes on any resolution that supports this initiative. If passed, this initiative will bring $12 billion back into communities for important services. 40% of this $12 billion is earmarked for education. We often talk in these meetings about what we can do to make important shifts in the advancement of student achievement, and I can't think of any issue that we face that couldn't be improved by $12 billion. Currently, the status quo is that 70% of all property tax revenue is generated by residential property owners. That certainly was never the intent of Prop 13, which was created to protect residential property owners and mom and pop businesses. Prop 13, unfortunately, has evolved in a way that has allowed billion-dollar corporations to find loopholes to avoid having their property values reassessed. Unlike most residential homeowners who have their property values reassessed whenever a property is sold, many corporations continue to pay property taxes on 1978 property value tax rates. Disney, for example, is paying 5 cents per square foot for their property. The current value of this is $5 per square foot. While many of us love the mouse, there is certainly an irony to a child-centric business shortchanging children in their schools and communities. There is also a great opposition to Schools and Communities First initiative out there. As you can imagine, these corporations are willing to spend a few million on an anti-initiative campaign rather than pay the billions they actually owe our schools and communities. I would encourage you to please educate yourself on this very important initiative and pass a resolution in support of it. You'll be in good company if you do. Among Schools and Community First supporters are local and state educators, from college professors to TK and preschool teachers, city councils and health organizations from Sacramento to San Diego, from Tony Thurman, the state superintendent of public education, to Libby Schaaf, the mayor of Oakland, local governments, faith-based organizations, health organizations, seniors, healthcare workers, teachers, and housing advocates, small businesses, and social justice warriors are in support of this important initiative. They all recognize that it is just time to course correct Prop 13 and focus and shift focus and funding back to our schools and communities. I want to thank Trustee Corzo for sharing CTA's proposed resolution and, more importantly, for agreeing to collect signatures to get this initiative on the ballot. I didn't want the other trustees to feel left out, so I've included some petitions for you, along with some sample guidelines to collect. So even if it's just you and your families who actually sign the petitions I have for you here, it's an important step in getting this on the ballot. And if anyone in the audience is interested in supporting $12 billion coming back to our schools and communities, I have some very able colleagues in the back who would love to take your signature as we try and get this on the ballot, right? So again, thank you for your time. I realize I've gone over, but I think for $12 billion, it might be worth a minute and 10 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Public statements related to agenda items, persons will be called on at the appropriate time. And moving on to foundation and committee reports.
I'll start. Foundation committee reports. We had a homeroom committee meeting on sorry, it was last Wednesday. And out of it, the whole conversation still talks about educator housing, and what came out of it was the continuous cooperation and collaboration with the city and the Rotary Club of San Mateo to figure out how we can further try and make a dent in the housing crisis that we're in, at least specifically for educators. So that meeting will continue to happen as we move forward.
We, Trustee Corzo and I had a meeting with the two San Mateo City Council liaisons, Councilmember Rodriguez and Councilmember Lee. We talked about lots of things. We talked about our just updates to facilities projects and kind of, there's some overlap there, of course, with the fire station that they're building, and just kind of where we are with that and ensuring that we're aligned. We talked a little bit about census efforts and how we can combine forces and how we're getting the word out and how we can collaborate on that because that's coming up. We talked a little bit about kind of current developments, enrollments, and impact on our various school sites, particularly as it pertains to our Phase 2 projects. So talking a little bit about George Hall and Sunnybray as areas of focus there. We gave them updates in terms of some of the things happening with Education Foundation, so the readathon and the run-to-fund, and then the gala, which I mentioned to you guys, is we're cruising on that. So just sharing with them kind of those updates and getting their support. In addition to talking a little bit about developer fees and some of the legislation that's pending around what the impact of some of that might be. And actually, Trustee Chin and I will be meeting tomorrow with Senator Hill around some of those items and just sharing kind of what the impacts of that are going to be. So, Ken, if you want to share more about that, feel free, or we can share next time.
Next time.
I did just want to share that in regards to the census work that we discussed at that meeting, there's going to be a Census 2020 Questionnaire Center kickoff in San Mateo at St. James AME Zion Church on February 1st from 11 to 1. So if you have questions about the census, need some resources, that will be the kickoff, but that will be a center available to the entire community. We also had another equity task force meeting, and we did have Nicole Anderson, who is a consultant that has been doing a lot of equity work with our county and also with the California School Boards Association around equity. She is now working with our district and supporting our equity task force. We had reviewed an article, the water of systems change, and then during our meeting we did go more in depth with a tool from, not a tool from the article, but a tool developed to support the article. So our equity task force work groups did begin to use that tool, and we're looking forward to seeing more work done on that. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, we also.
No.
Sorry, I'm just. Okay. I knew there was something else. So we did have a DLAC meeting this past Tuesday. I would say that it was a really important meeting. I don't think I'd ever been to a DLAC meeting where families actually clapped about something that our district is going to be doing differently. So it was like a big moment for me personally, and I think also for our district. And I'll share why that happened. But Dale Rogers runs our DLAC. She is our English learner coordinator, and she did share a tool with everyone that is going to be implemented starting this next school year that is very important to really informing and empowering families to understand really where their students are with learning English and how much work they need to do and how they can support them. So this tool on the back of it it actually will have space for not only the teacher, not only the student, but also the families and the district to really, talk about what their actions are going to be to help these students make progress towards learning English and reclassifying, which is something really important for them in terms of getting more access and more opportunities for rigorous content. That's not what why they clapped though. They clapped because Dale did share, some work that our Sanctuary Task Force has been doing. But not only did she share that, but she just, it wasn't like a big thing, but she just stated, she made several statements that are true, that we welcome all families in our school district. We want to serve all of them, and that we want our schools and our district to be a safe place for them. And that is where all the clapping began. But, I want to say that I think it was an important moment because, a lot of our families come and go from school and they don't necessarily hear that because, we all know most of us know how it feels to, rush in and out of school and drop off our kids and head to work. And so it was an important moment, and I really hope that that the work that the Sanctuary Task Force is doing will continue to spread. And I think that's a good summary. Any other report outs? No? Okay. So moving on to announcements. Any announcements?
I have an announcement. As I know I've mentioned this before, but I am part of the leadership program, and I'm a big proponent. I'm the co-chair of the Education Day and sit on the curriculum committee. For those interested, there is a leadership brown bag lunch on February 11th from 12:30 to 1:30. It's sort of a primer in case you ever wanted to know what is leadership and what leadership does. So in case you just want to, there's a lunch there, and I'd welcome all you guys to come. Most of our city council members and highly elected officials are leadership graduates or alumni. So it's a great program, and I'll pitch that all the time. The other announcement I will make is that there is a Safe Routes to School funding grant writing workshop on February 5th. I know that we're always looking for more money, and I know that that there is money from the county that is available for Safe Routes to School. So I just wanted to bring that attention to our wonderful staff to make sure that they have it on their radar. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements? No? Okay.
I had one.
great.
So several of us attended the Partnerships for Educator and Workforce Housing Task Force meeting, and so this was my first time going. I think several of you have been going, and I thought it was a great group of people to collaborate with. They talked a little bit about what's happening at Palo Alto and Los Gatos, two different models of workforce housing, and so I look forward to continuing to go to those meetings. And then also, I joined the Foster City Rotary Club, and as a Rotary member, I was helping out giving the dictionaries to the third graders in Foster City at the 3 elementary schools, and it was really fun to see the excitement on these children's faces when they got a dictionary, and they had a little assignment during that process to look up a few words and say the definitions, and I know San Mateo's getting some too, so it was really fun.
Okay. Moving on to our proposed consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second that.
All those in favor?
Can I make a comment? On the consent item, there is item, what is it? Sorry, it's the Abbott Gym, the notice of completion for the Abbott roof repair. Sorry, it is 623. Thank you. Thank you. I know I sort of beat, maybe a squeaky wheel, I beat the drum too much, but I want to talk about the solar as well, is that whenever we go ahead and look at doing a whole roof replacement on any of our schools, I really want to make sure that we actually do look into solar and the installation of solar, because climate change is real, and we do need to look at it. And as sort of leaders, when we go ahead and teach our kids about these things, we need to sort of walk the walk and talk the talk. So as we move forward, whether we look at Sunnybrae or Park or George Hall in terms of our new facilities, I really want to make sure, or any additional re-roofing to any of our facilities, that we actually do take a concerted effort to look at solar installation.
Okay. So let me just ask again for a motion, and or should we just?
So you have a motion on the table.
Okay, okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Great. Moving on to resolution number 16, 19, 20 school. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We pulled that. My mistake. Moving on to our enrollment projections. We have Sarah Drinkwater.
So good evening, President Corzo, trustees, Dr. Rosas. I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom Williams from Enrollment Projection Consultants, who will be providing information related to our school district. He has a long history with the district and is very familiar with changes over time. So, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I'm going to be even more number-centric on this presentation than some of my past ones, so I will apologize in advance. But there are some details in the numbers that are worth pointing out, so I'll go to them as we go through. I will say that this district is actually in a much better shape than virtually all of my other 20 clients. I have some clients like Cupertino that went down almost 2,000 kids in the last 3 years. So it's a tough time for a lot of districts right now, and a lot of them are talking about closing schools. So it's nice that your district's in a situation where you still need to open schools because you do have still cluttered facilities, and that's better than the alternative for sure. So on that note, I'll go to this. This just summarizes what's in the findings. I'm going to discuss most of this verbally as we go through the tables, but for those of you that don't understand what I'm talking about or want to know more about what the numbers say, this just goes into this. Briefly, I'll say that we're projected to go down by 98 students next year and 184 over the following 4 years, and that's concentrated in a few locations. It starts out in the middle school total because of small fifth grade graduating up, and then once that graduates out of 8, 3 years later, it turns the other way around. And a few of the attendance areas, that's the third bullet, will have some more significant changes. George Hall and Sunnybrae will actually go up in enrollment, in resident students. By that I mean students living in that attendance area regardless of the school they attend. They'll both go up significantly in the next 3 years. And then going down significantly in terms of resident students are Highlands, Baywood, San Mateo Park, and Lead. And then Foster City is kind of hard to describe because of the changing boundaries. But even with a slightly declining total in all of Foster City, you'll have an average of over 500 kids living in each of those attendance areas. And on that note, I'll go into the next slide. Now, this is hard to follow. Your enrollment tends to lose kids as each class graduates forward. And so when I talk about a big class or large class, to make it simple, I talk about how big that class was, is, or will be when it reaches 8th grade. In those colors on the right, you'll see that the orange on the top part on the column 8 is for classes that are all under 1,100. And one class is barely over 1,100, 1,108. That's why your enrollment grew so much, because you had a bunch of bigger kindergartens starting about 2007, and those classes graduated upward, and the smaller classes graduated out. You notice that by 2014, the last orange-colored class is graduating out. Right now, we have an especially small class in 5th grade, that yellow-colored class, 1,179. That class will graduate into the middle schools for the next 3 years. That's why the middle school numbers come down for the next 3 years. Once that yellow class departs after 2022, the middle school numbers bounce right back up to the current level. Does that make sense to everybody? Similarly, because of that small class leaving TK5 for next year, even though we have a relatively small kindergarten coming in, that small class going out of 5th makes it a wash for the total of the elementary level. Thereafter, there's no more small classes going out of 5th grade, and there's still small kindergarten classes coming in, and that's why the elementary number starts to go down significantly after next year. And as you'll see in the bottom, I'm saying the total grade level change in 1 year is a gain of 2 at the elementary level and a loss of 100 at the middle school level. That's because of that 5th grade class again. But as we get out 4 and 5 years, you'll see that the losses are entirely at the elementary level. As you'll see later in this report, we have some birth data that is pretty scary. And you're not unique in that. You're actually in a better shape than a lot of districts. I have some zip codes in Santa Clara County where the birth data is off over 20%, or the equivalent of 1 in every 5 kindergartners in 5 years. But if you look off to the right, your current kindergarten is the left, your current kindergarten is that 1249 in yellow. For the next 3 years, I'm projecting a little bit bigger class than that in kindergarten, but still, those numbers, 1302, 1297, and 1288, are far below. If you go back up to 2007 through 2011, they're all in the 1400s. That's how much smaller these classes are than what you were getting in the peak. And then we get out to 2023 and 2024, the latest birth data says smaller kindergarten classes, even smaller still. Does everybody follow me on that? Okay. Now, again, I talk about where the kids live. All my analyses are based on where they live, the housing types, the income levels, etc. And only when I'm done with basing the numbers on where the kids live, what I call the resident student location, do I try and tie it back to enrollment at all. And the reason I need to do that is you have huge intra-district enrollment numbers because you've got 4 magnet schools without boundaries, and a lot of the other schools with boundaries are magnet schools as well. So, for example, San Mateo Park has 120 fewer students attending that school than living in that attendance area in grades K-5. It's not a problem with that school, it's just because you got so many good magnet schools that people want to go to instead. So I want to focus on the resident numbers and not the attending numbers. And that columns off to the right talk about what's happening with the resident numbers. And for 2020, you'll see that all those numbers, or almost all those numbers, are very small. Talking a change of 3 for San Mateo Park, and 5 for Baywood, and 8 for Sunny Brae. Does everybody see where I'm looking? And it's only when you get down to the middle schools that you start seeing some more significant numbers. But again, middle schools have 3 times as many kids as the elementary schools, so those still aren't huge numbers. The biggest change happens in 2021. It starts to happen in 2021. We start seeing some orange numbers for smaller declines, as well as George Hall picking up 65 kids over that 2-year period. So when we get out to 2022, you start seeing some more significant numbers. You'll see that all of Foster City loses 142, but that still results in a total of 2,067 K-5 kids living in those 4 attendance areas for, of course, the new school opening. So that's still over 500 per school living in those attendance areas. And the middle schools, again, they went down, they bounced back up with one exception, Bayside. Bayside goes down significantly just because there happens to be a very small 3rd and 4th grade class in the Bayside attendance area, and that's why those fall off more significantly. When I talk about the new school for a minute, I'm going to compare the current resident numbers with what the future attendance areas will be. So they're different areas. And for Audubon, there are currently 907 K-5 kids, not even counting TK, K-5 kids enrolled in the district today in the Audubon attendance area. By 2022, we'll have that number down to 708. Now, some of those kids choose to go to Brewer Island anyway, so you won't have 708 enrolled there. But I was just pointing out how big that number now is at Audubon. And even with 200 kids going out to the new school area, we still have a total of over 700 kids projected in that attendance area. Now, that won't be that many attending. There'll probably still be about 150 going out to other schools like Brewer Island, but still that gets you down to what many districts would consider an appropriate class school size for an elementary school. Similarly, Foster City currently has almost 900 kids, 895, and it's being brought down to 576 with the Penny School opening. That's the 2 green colors, the blue colors and the green colors. And then the Penny School, you'll see, is going to have about 409 kids, which, considering the size of that campus, I think we would assume is a good number. Is that correct, Joan? Mm-hmm. So the boundaries you're coming up with those schools are coming out pretty good. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Let's talk about what's going on in the housing. You have very divergent trends going on in different housing types and different approximate income levels. Within the detached homes, in the right column, you'll see we're losing kids across the board. Whether it's the relatively affordable units, we're down 7% in the last 3 years, or what I call the modest and moderate, they're down 4%, or in the more expensive detached homes, we're down 11% in 3 years. That last number, I want to emphasize what's happening in K2. Of that 370 kids we're down in 3 years, just 3 years, 199 are in K2 alone. That's a significant drop. You went from 918 to 719 in 3 years. in those homes. And the problem is, young families can't buy those. Point blank. It's the effect of the price. We have far less young families, people with kindergarten, second grade kids, being able to buy into those homes nowadays. They're instead going into the townhouses and the condos, which they can still afford. So we're seeing a shift. The attendance areas that have mainly more expensive detached homes, we're seeing plummeting kindergarten numbers. Then the most affordable attached units, they're also down a little bit, but those are relatively small student numbers, less than 800. When I get into what I call the intermediate attached, which has over 2,000 of your district's kids, that actually added kids in the last 3 years. Again, because that's where families can afford to go in housing they're willing to live in. And in kindergarten, in K2, they jump by 56, which is almost all of that increase. So for attendance areas that have a concentration in that housing type, we're seeing growth. Does that make sense to everybody? And then the more expensive attached housing, the townhouses in particular, they're also up a little bit, although that was mainly growth in the upper grades. It was only changed by 2 in K2. So going forward for the future, of the 6 categories I show here, most affordable through most expensive of attached, by attached I mean apartments, condos, townhouses, and plexes. We have 1 category with gaining population, 5 categories with declining or stable populations in the lower grades. So for the total for all areas with no new housing built since September 2014, we've lost 165 in K2, 387 overall, and 3%. I point that out because all the new housing we had going in, and there was a lot of new housing going in, it added 37 in K2 and 68 overall. Compare that to what we lost in existing housing. We lost 4 to 5 times as much in the existing housing as we gained from the new housing. The new housing is helping this district's enrollment. It is not hurting this district's enrollment. And then the all other I listed at the bottom, so to point out that your district cut back significantly on inter-district attendance this year. I'm guessing, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, Joan. What's happening is other districts that are having declining enrollments are being much less willing to release students than they were before. Okay, first. This table is not as scary as in most districts, but it's still scary. I look at the births that happen in local zip codes, and the number of kids that ended up in those zip codes 5 years later in kindergarten, correlating births to kindergartners. And I prorate the calendar year births so that they deal with the September 1 to August 30 period that correlates to kindergarten classes 5 years later. And if you look at the orange column, that's the births going back to 2007 prorated up to 2014 for recent and current kindergartners. And you'll notice that those births went from the 1900s to the upper 1800s to the lower 1800s. Now we're at 1855 and the mid 1800s. Does everybody see where I'm looking? Mm-hmm. Okay, then you go down below for the births for the next 4 years. We actually bounce up a little bit for the next 3 years. But the latest data, 2018, drops all the way down to 1803. Again, that's way better than I'm getting in most zip codes. But nonetheless, there's a big drop off in 2018. That's the prorated number. The actual calendar year 2018 number is in the upper 1700s, and it's the lowest birth total in this district since 2001. And this district was a lot smaller enrollment in 2001. Okay, that's what's happening with the births. In the right column is what's happening with the ratio of kids showing up in kindergarten 5 years later from these births. And you'll see that it was 77% and then 74% and then hovering around 74, 73%. Then last year it dropped to 71% and this year it dropped to 67%. To me, that's because price of housing is making some of those families, more of those families move out in the intervening 5 years. Rents are going up, costs are going up, moving out. So when you have declining birth numbers in 2018 and declining ratios of those births showing up 5 years later, it's a dangerous combination. As you'll see in the lower right corner, if the current ratio is applied to the 2018 births, we could have less than 1,200 resident kindergartners in 2023 compared to having over 1,500 back in 2012. That's a 20% drop. But that's all the way back to 2012. And a lot of districts like that just going back to the current enrollment. There's what it looks like in terms of calendar year numbers in the zip codes relevant to this district and how we soared in the early 2000s and then came down a little bit and all of a sudden it's just tailed spin straight down. I could show you the same chart or worse for an awful lot of districts. There's the countywide birth numbers from 2006 to 2018. It's just plummeting. And again, price of housing is behind all of this. what are we getting out of new housing? In the market rate apartments and condos being built in this district, in a sample of over 1,100 units, we only got 43 students. Part of the problem with those apartments is they're being designed for singles and childless couples. They're mainly studios, one-bedrooms, and tiny two-bedrooms, often the second bedroom being used for an office, and they're renting for $3,000 to $4,000. So they're not exactly suitable for young families. When we get into the detached homes, the townhouses, which are a little bit more roomy, of course, more suitable for that family, we got more kids out of those 386 units than we did out of the 1,109 apartments and condos. But we're still only averaging about one student every 8 detached homes and townhouses in San Mateo. Foster City has been higher. Foster City, we're averaging essentially 50% higher rate, probably because the buildings that were built in Foster City, like the Triton, are heavily multiple bedroom units, so they're more suitable for families. A lot of people think all this new housing is generating a lot of kids, so I just want to emphasize again, 1,109 apartments and condos gave us 43 kids. It was not hundreds and hundreds of kids like people were saying. I wish it was a few hundred kids, it would help the enrollment. Mainly BMR developments or below market rate developments. They're eligible to people with certain incomes, like below 60% of the county median, and they're averaging about 2 students every 3 units. And you do have some of that projected. So, when I'm applying those units to the numbers being projected, I'm projecting 2,800 units in the next 5 years in this district. But the majority, 1,800 of them, are in that category that's only giving us 1 student in every 25 units. So when we get into the mainly below market rate developments, we've got 280, we start talking about significant student numbers. And if you look at the numbers going across from 2020 to 2024, we're going from about 320 being occupied this year, that means in the 1 year until next October 1, to over 700 in 2023 and 2024. Those projects are in the works. They're in the planning process, some of them are already approved, so it's possible for that to happen. Nonetheless, 700 units a year, even in this market, is a lot of units. So that's kind of an optimistic number. That's what the planning departments are telling me will happen. But I think it could happen, but it could easily only be 500. So sometimes projects seem like they're on track and all of a sudden they get delayed for 3 or 4 years, for whatever reason. The Concord development's been going slower than everybody thought a couple of years ago, as an example. So, bottom line is, these numbers I showed you back here, being down 300 kids could be slightly optimistic. It's quite possible it could be down more like 400 or 450 in 5 years. Questions? Okay. That's a good sign, I hope.
I have questions.
Okay.
I love it when you come. I know I say this every year, but I love it when you come every year to talk about this because I love looking at the data and the numbers. So let me dive right in. The first question I have is when you're talking about the affordable, mid, and moderate and upper categories defined in Table 3 and 4 in terms of the housing units, how are you defining the affordable, mid, and moderate, and upper income categories?
Depend on how the unit characteristics. Affordable tends to have no covered parking at all. In fact, often has limited parking, inadequate parking, lacks decks, lacks much greenery. It's sort of just a pillbox building with some parking spaces underneath, and that's about it. Intermediate would be the apartments that have carports with gated entries, swimming pools, amenities like that, but still not overly secure to the outside. When I get an upscale high amenity, I'm talking about having garages at a minimum. Generally have larger square footage, but also go for a lot more money, so they're harder for families to get into. Right. Nonetheless, you're getting gains in those categories. Right. The affordable units may seem to be contradictory to what I said earlier. What's happening in those categories is even though there's smaller rent increases, those people are the most prone to not be able to afford any rent increase at all. So when those units go up $200 a month in rent, a lot of those people can't do it. Yeah. And so that's why when the other attached categories were getting gains, in that category, even though those rents aren't going up as much as a lot of other categories, they're still harder for some of those families to maintain.
Oh, thank you.
Now, when we get into detached homes, again, it's subjective, but affordable tends to be the one-car garage homes. The modest and moderate tend to be a little bit bigger homes with two-car garages, but still on relatively small lots, and they're much older homes. When I get in the middle and upper middle income, I'm talking about, generally speaking, larger lots, although there's some nice historic districts on the west side of El Camino Real that I would put in that category, even though they're smaller lots, because they're such nice historic homes.
And then you listed as a project for, let me see. I said, which projects did you use to generate the student generation rate for the single-family townhomes in San Mateo? I know that you went through and you listed a number of projects, but I wasn't sure which project.
Went into the samples?
Yeah, where the sample was for the single-family dwelling and townhomes, because I don't recall San Mateo building a lot of specifically single-family
There isn't
dwellings.
much. There is one development off of Campus Drive.
Yes.
I'm forgetting the name of that.
Verona Ridge.
Verona Ridge. Most of that sample's townhouses.
Okay.
There was just not enough detached homes to give it its own sample. We're only talking 48 detached homes. The student generation has such a wide range of statistical deviation. And when I looked at what I was getting out of those detached homes versus what I was getting out of townhouses, they were very similar. So it made sense to put them together.
And then you made a statement about the birth rates, and we're in a lot better shape than some of your other clients. Have you seen the birth rates? I don't know if you have any East Bay clients, but I would assume that as our housing prices are going up and everyone migrates sort of south and west, or east, that their birth rates might actually increase because the housing is maybe affordable farther
You
east
would
in the Bay
think
Area.
that. I mean, I've been telling Castro Valley this for 10 straight years,
Yeah.
and it hasn't budged an inch.
Yeah.
They're a longtime client of mine, too. I mean, there are districts over there that I would think would be being recipients of these families,
Yeah.
and it's just not showing up in the data. I just think the fact that they're even holding steady on their births, I think is better than most. I don't know if better is the right word, because I think we have a lot more people not having kids now,
Yeah.
probably because of the cost of housing.
Okay. And then the other big assertion that came out of your report was the number of students that are going to be here within, was it 3 years, and that it was, what is there? I equated to basically, after doing the calculation of the units, it would have been about 85 students that would be at Sunnybrae and 22 at George Hall, because you emphasized that those two schools would be the ones who'd be most impacted by all the developments within the city of San Mateo.
There's another thing. There's often a delayed impact to new housing, and I'm talking specifically now about Bay Meadows too. A lot of times the first year or two, for reasons I've never fully figured out in the 35 years I've been doing this, more kids show up in the third and fourth and fifth year. I don't know if it's the first round of turnover because it has more of a neighborhood feel. There's not construction going on around anymore, or if it's just people take a while to transfer over from whatever school they were in before or whatever, or they didn't even update their address in the district file for a couple of years. But whatever reason, whenever a big development like Bay Meadows 2 goes in, there's often a kick that comes in the third, fourth, fifth year. And so part of what I'm getting growth for George Hall in particular out of is housing units that were just occupied in the last couple of years. In Sunnybrae's case, on the other hand, there's a little bit of apartments built in the last couple of years. It was mowed, but most of the Sunnybrae kick is the future housing.
Yeah. And then in regards to, I know you mentioned Sunnybrae and Laurel, and I really appreciate, I think it's table 2, I think it is, that shows the the resident students versus the intending enrollment. We're going to be spending millions of dollars to add classrooms, whether at Sunnybrae or George Hall. And I'm wondering whether or not we've actually ever looked at the city's general plan and figured out that, hey, they're going to possibly rezone some areas, either commercial or industrial, where they're going to add new housing. And if we keep the sort of the boundaries where they're at now, certain schools are definitely going to be impacted versus not. Sorry, so that's basically my question. I'm wondering whether or not we do need to look at the city's general plans and the future developments where there is not housing now and there are plans to be housing, and whether or not we could maybe save some money by possibly making minor adjustments to the boundary lines to move one boundary over so that one school isn't fully impacted. And the reason why I say that is that Sunnybrae is, when you look at the development around Sunnybrae. It's the Passage, it's Station Park Green, all the development downtown San Mateo. A lot of that is going towards Sunnybrae, and Sunnybrae is a very small campus. And so the idea is that, I'm wondering whether or not we should actually just look at that, but I just throw that out there.
The big hit for Sunnybrae, and it's a couple of years off, is actually a giant below market rate development. I shouldn't call it giant, a big below market rate development right by the tracks at
Third and
5th, I think, is it?
It's between third and fourth, and
Yeah.
yes.
And
The old
and-
FedEx, yeah. I think goes a lot, yeah.
And the nature of those developments is they always take longer than you think they would. I have some that I think the city swore to me, not about this city, a different city, cities, would swear to me, that's going to be in 18 months. Well, 3 years later, it still wasn't in. So the funding mechanisms and everything else is different with affordable housing developments. Nonetheless, that will happen within the next 5 years.
Yep.
And that, of course, is on the edge of the Sunnybrae attendance area. So that would be one location that would have a possibility, for example, of a boundary adjustment.
So you have in your report that we'd get basically off of the 0.7 a student generation rate, we'd get about, I think it was, I forget how many
Well,
students.
0.7 is K-8, and of course, we're only worried about K-5 here.
Oh, yes.
So it'd be about probably 0.5 at the elementary
Okay.
level.
Well, the thing about San Mateo is now looking to add 2 additional floors to that, which would be increasing the units to another 60 units. So instead of 142 units, they're looking at 224, which would definitely impact. It's a whole nother classroom, basically at Sunnybrae, just by that increase. And so I am concerned about that in terms of the boundaries and in terms of how much of our development is being impacting to basically one school specifically. So the last question I'm going to pose, and I'll pose this to probably Patrick, is that I know that in the report you're suggesting that we're going to lose, I forget, X number of students. The way I calculated out, that's essentially $7 million off of our budget in 3 years or so, and I just want to know whether or not we account that in our 3-year budget projection.
So when we talk in a few moments, when I share with you the governor's budget, what we're going to talk about too is the district's currently a community-funded district. So although we lose enrollment, you're not losing property taxes. So what that does is it puts you further into community-funded status. So
Fantastic, thank you.
Yep.
That does answer my question, thank you. Thank you, those are my questions.
The one other thing I want to say is, I think what's going on in 2022 are some problems. I think what's happening in 2020 is not a problem. So it's not like I'm telling you, we got to deal with this in the next 3 months, or, next year is status quo. So we got some time to see how these things pan out, including that below market rate development, whether it's going to be the new units or whatever. So we're not in a rush on this. So I think next year we may be talking, it's a little bit more urgent, but I don't see it being urgent this year.
Any other questions? No? I had one, quick one. Well, 2.
Okay.
Did you know that your enrollment report made it into the Daily Journal today?
Yeah, Joan told me Austin had an article on me. And Austin's usually pretty fair. There are some local papers that send us, say things that I don't know where they come up with them, but Austin does a pretty good job. Thank you for telling me, though.
Yeah, so I completely understand that we have declining enrollment, but it's not, it's not causing us to close schools. We're still opening one, we're still going to open another. So I'm grateful that our community is in that safe zone. I did have a question. So basically, I know there's no data for this question that I'm going to ask you, but I'm just wondering if you've ever come across it in any of your work with other districts. Is there any way to know or to put a number on how many families are actually living together in smaller apartments, et cetera?
I get asked that question a lot. First of all, I don't think there's a way to find out. But secondarily, I don't think it is happening. Obviously, it is happening. I don't think it's happening as extensive as we'd think, because, for example, in the most affordable category I should refer attached, we should see that number coming up if that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're getting some kids because of that doubling up. At the same time, we're losing other kids out of the same apartment complexes because the families can afford to live there. So I think it's sort of a wash. I want to go back to your first question, though. I forgot to point out one thing here. even with that growth I'm talking about, the red colored line in 2024, if you compare the 2007 enrollment to the 2024 enrollment, we're still up 800 plus kids in elementary. We're still up almost 400 kids in the middle school level in 2024, despite the decline from the current enrollment. So, and basically we've only added one school during that time. So we have a much larger enrollment than we did 12 years ago. And even with the decline in forecasting, we'll still have a much larger enrollment than we did back in 2007 and for a couple decades before 2007. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to Parkside Montessori Plan.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to have an opportunity to present to you some strategic planning that we have been doing with the leadership at Parkside Elementary School. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through some elements of that. I understand you have the document. You've had an opportunity to look through it. I'm going to kind of hit some highlights and then open it up for any questions that you may have. Let me also say in presenting the plan to you that obviously this reflects a tremendous amount of work on the part of Nima Tahai, our principal at Parkside. So when we get to the questions, certainly be happy to bring him up to support you getting your questions answered. Before I launch into the actual plan itself, I just want to take a few minutes to kind of frame the path we've been on here in arriving at this strategic plan. First of all was, what I think maybe our first best move, which was in fact hiring Nima back in June, and finding somebody who Neiman, I'm not going to take any credit for this applause. I just want to make sure that. And then, once Nima was hired, beginning the work of supporting him, both just building his capacity and deepening his understanding of Montessori. And from that began in July and continues ongoing. And then note that in August and September, our superintendent led a series of engagements with family and staff, where there was a lot of listening, a lot of learning, a lot of perhaps relearning of people's experiences, which obviously led to board recommendation around the K-8 plan at Parkside, but perhaps more importantly, actually deepened our understanding of the history and the issues and the concerns that we need to meet, with this strategic planning. Then, giving Nima a minute to open up the school and kind of, get his legs under him a bit. I think he and I began our first strategic planning meeting in late September. And then by mid-October, Nima had identified, for example, the National Center for Montessori in the public sector. We were on the phone with them, getting their great input and guidance around kind of the essential elements of Montessori in the public sector. And then I think in early November, we were beginning to kind of land on some very specific recommendations, some things that we agreed needed to be in place. There were a series of engagements that we held with Nima and Dr. Rosas and Executive Cabinet, kind of beginning to sort of nail down some of those points. And then finally, in early January, we had, in effect, a draft strategic plan on paper, and engaged with others around sort of double checking that we were on the right track here. And then we arrived tonight. I'd just like to note that we continue to have ongoing a lot of communication as well as regular monthly meetings to talk about the plan and address the elements of it. So just want to give you a sense of what the work was that was going on that led to this plan this evening. So looking at the plan itself, again, I don't want to stand up here and kind of read stuff to you, so I'm going to assume that you can look at it. The first overall strategy, of course, is building and strengthening the current TK5 program. And you'll see a set of actions there. The first of which is launching the TK5 leadership team, which has begun. Just to say that work is happening now. It's being supported by the district with additional funds to support time cards. We even have one of our central TOSAs who is steeped in Montessori providing some extra time in support of that leadership team. Second action there, which talks about, I mentioned the National Center for Montessori in the public sector. Very important that we do, kind of an evidence-based and a Montessori framework-based review of the current TK5 program. So we're making the arrangements right now for that. I think NEMA is working with them and actually has probably identified dates by this point. There's contract involved with that, moving forward with getting that contract in place to make sure that review happens this spring. The third item here, we begin to turn actually to what's going to start full-fledged kind of summer into fall. So the bringing on a Montessori coach, we're still trying to identify whether this would actually be an employee of the district, would be a teacher on special assignment, or whether it would be a consultant. In either case, we want to find the best person possible and somebody that NEMA and the leadership at Parkside have a lot of confidence in. You'll see there the commitment is that the district will fund that position for 4 years, and then at that point, the expectation is that if the role is to continue, that the school would assume responsibility for that. Of course, because we haven't landed on that person, and whether it's a hired position or a consultant, we don't have the exact cost for that determined at this point. But I want to note that we'll be working on that this spring, trying to make the hire that in fact the budget for this will be captured in the school's SIPSA as well as in our district LCAP budget. So those specific numbers will be brought forth at that point once we know who it is we're actually working with. It's important to note that the coach's primary responsibilities will be supporting the TK5 program and building it out. In doing that work, the coach will also be collaborating with leadership at North Shore View Montessori. We want to make sure that as we continue to work on quality at Parkside, that we're of course doing it in concert and parallel with the North Shore View program. So it'll be very important that coach, that NEMA, Rosemary, the TOSAs that we have at the sites currently, that they're all working in concert with teachers in developing a strong program at both schools. Finally, just with respect to that, as we talk about any of these actions, I want to note that the district will provide information to the community primarily through Principal Tahai and his reports to the Parkside community. And then, of course, as you request, we will do updates to you per your schedule. Next item on there is, of course, we know that at Parkside right now we have a number of teachers who are not thoroughly Montessori trained, especially to the highest standards that we would like. And that, of course, we're going to be adding staff, and we have to think about this question of Montessori training very, very carefully. You'll note that the plan for next year is to budget enough to support the training for 8 teachers, and then 4 years after that. So we anticipate that the bulk of this, getting everybody trained and adding folks who are trained, will occur over the next 4 years. But, we want to note that it's always been a part of our HR planning in the LCAP that there's an allocation for recruiting and training difficult to fill positions. And so there will always be funding available on an ongoing basis to address any needs that Montessori or other programs may have in that respect. So mention of the ongoing training and support for NEMA. There's the obviously enhancing, and as the school grows, thinking about the Montessori materials. One of the things that's interesting right now, we have a base standard for providing Montessori materials in all classrooms. I'm actually looking forward to the school review where they can go through with us, and if we need to make an adjustment to that standard base Montessori materials that we currently provide, we'll be happy to do that. It is our responsibility to all schools to provide core instructional materials. We'll continue to do that at Parkside. Okay, and then again, trying not to read everyone, but noting that obviously the second big strategy is the build out of the middle school program. You can see the actions identified there of getting the design team up and going. That design team will be supported, of course, by the principal as well as by the Montessori coach. A lot to be decided about the design of the program and the configurations. So you'll note that items sort of 3 and 4 on there there's not a lot of detail. And that's because we have to make those program decisions. And based on those, we'll have a better understanding of exactly what the classroom facility needs will be, what the materials needs will be, et cetera. So, frankly, it would just be premature at this point to be any more detailed until we get to clarity about exactly the design of the program. I do want to note you are aware that currently there are portables on the campus that are currently being used by city program, and right now my understanding is that there's 3 years left in that agreement, and so we would expect business services will be working with the city as we think about what's the transition of those programs off the campus elsewhere so we can accommodate the growing middle school program. There are some other strategies there also still to be determined. Some of them relate to what we call, the National Center calls the essential Montessori elements. And then there's, of course, some district essential elements that we would want to identify too that are spelled out there. So let me pause there. Do you want to
Yes,
add
I just
something?
wanted to make sure that we're all clear. When it's Foster City Preschool, but it's not the city. It's the
Apologies.
private preschool. That's why I just
Thank
wanted to
you.
make sure you knew that that's what we were just talking about.
All right, and open to any questions that you may have.
So I believe that we had wanted to do public comments and then discussion. And so I do just want to ask how many we have, because I feel like I want to know how many we have.
We have 4.
Okay, great. If it was going to be more than that, I'll just be honest, I was going to cut it down to a little bit. So thank you. Okay, so public comment, please.
So we have 4 people making comment, and I'm just going to go ahead and read their names. If you could come up one at a time. The first is Amy Connors. The second is Monique Nakagawa. The third speaker is Rebecca McCahey. And the fourth speaker is Randy Painter.
Thank you. Good evening, school board trustees, Dr. Rosas, and district staff. My name is Amy Connors, and as you know, I'm the parent of 2 boys at Parkside and the PTA president. This is an exciting night for Parkside Montessori. We're thrilled to have a 4-year strategic plan on the agenda and to hear the details of the plan presented tonight. And I thank David for doing that. As you've heard so many of us speak in the past, this level of district support is critical to the success of the program. As parents, we are all committed to this program for our students and the students to come. We are here because we believe in the Montessori education, we support our Parkside teachers, and we are encouraged to now have a principal who has the vision and the ability to create and lead this plan for our school. So we must keep this momentum going. We know that there are many needs in the district, and we appreciate that the commitment made to keep and grow the Montessori program at Parkside is now being supported by the district with this initial funding, staffing, and the training to make this expansion a success. There are still questions to work out and follow up on, and we look forward to hearing more as time moves forward on how the plan implementation is going, how the recruiting is going for our new staff needs, how teacher training programs are going, and how facilities updates are being accommodated. We hope that as the school board and district remain committed to the success of the Parkside Montessori program, that will continue, and we will continue to support our principal and the staff in this effort as the parent community. We have been disappointed and discouraged in the past, but we are eager to continue on this path forward with collaboration and community for the success of all our Parkside students. Thank you very much.
Good evening, President Corzo, members of the board, and Superintendent Rosas. My name is Monique Nakagawa. I think it's important for the board to recognize that in offering Montessori, it is offering an alternative education. And in other words, we're offering an education that is not the norm. And not the norm is an important detail because we don't, therefore, have a collective norm from which to draw envisioning what a Montessori middle years program will look like. So we're going to have to be intentional. We have to do our research, and the development of the program will have to be thoughtful and informed. For reference sake, I work in institutional research at a community college. And part of my duties is educational evaluation of programs. When we evaluate a program for success, one of the things that we look at is, did they adopt best practices? Best practices are what we see as those practices that will maximize the likelihood of success. There is a body of literature, albeit rather small, which does discuss best practices in Montessori adolescent programs. And among the key points I found are that you need a strong K-5 program. You do need trained teachers, and especially an experienced Montessori adolescent teacher as your lead. And also, there really is no plug-and-play Montessori middle years curriculum. So consequently, the development of the program will have to be thoughtful and informed. I do like what was presented tonight. I think it addresses many of those points. I would like to add that I think we are also missing an element of outreach. We do have to ask who we're building this program for. Are we building it for people who are in the know on Montessori? I don't think so. But that's not going to change unless there's outreach and public education about what Montessori is. So anyway, in conclusion, I think that if the board wishes to support the success of the Montessori Middle Years program at Parkside, please recognize that we will need resources. It will be an investment to develop a thoughtful and informed program. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Rosas and the San Mateo Foster City School Board trustees. Thank you, David, for sharing the Parkside Montessori 4-year strategic plan. I appreciate all of the work put into developing this plan for the future of Parkside, and I appreciate the support the district and the school board has provided to get to this point. Through the past 9+ months of discussing the middle years program at Parkside, many of the parents have identified key questions we feel are critical to understanding whether or not the district is committed to and prepared to support the program expansion at Parkside. Given the history at Parkside in which commitments have been made but not successfully implemented, we know that this is only the beginning of our journey. There is much work to be done, and there are still many questions to be addressed. Some we hope can be answered tonight, and others we know will require additional planning. But we want to make sure we do not lose the momentum that is built over the past month or so. So first off, I have to say I'm relieved to see that the strategy lists a Montessori coach, TOSA consultant for 4 years. But to be honest, I was surprised as I was sitting here to hear that that resource is shared with North Shoreview, considering the dramatically different positions that our schools are in. We asked for a full-time dedicated TOSA, and so I'd like to understand how many hours a week is Parkside getting this resource to build a program, to expand a program, and to train our teachers that are not trained yet, as opposed to support an existing established program. I think that that is critical to understanding whether we are going to be successful at implementing this program at Parkside. Second, I'm glad to hear that there's been some discussion of funds that have been for the TOSA and for teacher training, but I'm still left wondering, what is the overall budget for the full scope required to build a middle years program at Parkside? What is going to happen when we ask for library books that are at a middle school reading level? What happens when they realize the toilets are a perfect size for kindergartners, but not appropriate for 13-year-olds? Funds will be needed to add materials and to upgrade the facility. We understand that these details and needs will be more clearly defined as we get farther through the design and implementation. But as these details are defined and costs are further understood, how will that funding get approved? And who will decide which needs will be met? How can we be guaranteed the district will act on the plans presented tonight? This is only the beginning of the journey, and the planning has only begun. When will we next hear that the district has committed to the next stage of this program's development? I would like to stop focusing on the failures of the past and start focusing on building and growing toward a better future at Parkside. This tonight is the first positive step I've seen in that direction. And we hope that you feel that you are part of Team Parkside, and I hope we can continue to work together with the district and the board to make Parkside Montessori a school in which students are thriving TK through 8. So join us, please.
Thank you.
I had the opportunity to attend the 4:30 study session this afternoon prior to this evening's board meeting. There were a couple of comments about board priorities that I wanted to address, and I ask for your patience. This statement is about Parkside. One trustee was concerned about how much board meeting time ends up being consumed by schools that aren't necessarily the schools in our district that are the most in need. Reading between the lines, I'm assuming this reference was to the Montessori schools. Another trustee referred to the upcoming presentation tonight about our district schools that are underperforming. I believe that the trustee was referring to tonight's presentation about the district's Title I schools. I'm concerned about the interpretation of Title I versus underperforming. This matters for a complete understanding of who needs support. Title I schools are defined by the proportion of students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. They're not defined by their test scores. Now, it's true that the single strongest predictor of test scores in a school is the proportion of students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch, but this extremely strong correlation does not create the definition. To help you understand even a little bit better, a school with 50%, we'll call them low-resourced students, will have about 50% of the students not meeting the testing standards. A school with 10% low-resource students will have about 10% not meeting the standard. This is approximately the same approach on an aggregate level if you use that proportion of what the Core Data Collaborative is doing on an individual level for California school districts. So another important way to evaluate performance by school in our district is how close or how far the test scores in each school are from what would be predicted based on the proportion of low-resource students or those students receiving free or reduced price lunch. So I already gave you the punchline to this not funny at all story. The school that has the farthest negative deviation in actual performance versus predicted according to that proportion is Parkside, according to the 2019 CASP scores. I urge you to listen to and believe your parent stakeholders. Parkside is underperforming. I'm happy to show any of you the data one-on-one or collectively. Parkside definitely has long needed your solid commitment and real support. This effort is not a waste of time or resources, and thank you for that.
I have some thoughts I wanted to share. I also was questioning in the packet that we received, what the time commitment is of the coach that they're receiving, and it wasn't clear. Let me move my laptop. It wasn't clear to me if that was a full-time position or what, if it's like a as-needed basis or whatever. So, is it full-time?
It is a full-time position, yes.
And then I think it's important to lay out a budget for this. I think not only is it financially important for us to know, but I do think that it cements a commitment, and I think.
And so we do have a budget to every line item. The thing is that there are ranges, and so we don't know who the people are going to be, whether it's going to be a consultant. We don't know the number of hours that are going to be required. We don't know yet what the American Montessori is going to ask, so we've put it in ranges. And so when we get more clear, we can bring back a final budget, but we have estimated the entire packet you have there, and we have identified the funding based on the lowest and the highest that it could go.
Joan, excuse me, Dr. Rosas, if I could add, and I also want to emphasize that the SIPSA process at the school site and the LCAP process at the district level are fundamentally budgeting processes, and so we want to rely on those standard systems where we get input from parents at the site, we get input from parents at the district level. We want to make sure we embed all of this budgeting work in those processes and arrive at that detail through those processes.
Okay. And then in terms of the training that the teachers will receive, I'm not super familiar with the Montessori program, so I don't know if is that time spent out of the classroom, or how will we support the teachers while they're getting this training? And
yeah, I mean, to this point, I mean, I really appreciate the work that Nima has done. There are a variety of models. Some of them involve summers, some of them involve evenings, some of them involve online work, and Nima has identified several programs that can range from approximately $6,000 per teacher upwards of $15,000 per teacher. So from a kind of budgeting point of view, right at the moment, we just kind of split it and said we're estimating about $10,000. But a lot of that is going to have to be based on what makes sense for them as a cohort, as well as what individual teachers' needs are. Can they take summers and things like that? So that is to be determined.
Okay. And the last thing I'll say is, as Randy mentioned, we did have a study session before this, and one of the pieces of the mission statement that kind of stood out for me was partnering with our families and our community. So I think it's really great to see everyone here, and I know this is going to be kind of a long road, and so I hope that we can work together on this and work with everyone in the district and all of our families and communities to really make this a success. So that is what I have to say.
No, kind of echoing what Allison said, I really appreciate you all here and voicing your opinions and thoughts, because it does take all of us to make one thing successful. And I hope doing at least this step does hopefully show our commitment. We are passionate about success for students, for every student. And it's gone, but yeah.
I think there's one thing about this process that has sort of dawned on me is that beyond, the amazing community outreach that we've had from the Parkside community and the effort and the real bonds that I've heard that are happening because of this issue at Parkside, which again, I think when we go to visit every school has a different kind of community and different kind of parent involvement. And I believe that, because of this issue, Parkside has really, set the base to be successful in terms of that aspect, to really have parent and family engagement in this. One thing that I've also realized, of course, is that we're up here as a fairly newer board and a newer administration, and we're trying to correct some maybe trust and mistrust or missteps from previous boards and administration. And so what I like about this plan is that it sort of sets out a 4-year plan in terms of how to be successful. And the way I look at it is I see it's a nice little PDF chart, but I always take those little pieces and those action items and start putting them into an Excel chart or Google Sheets and say, all right, now that we have these actions, how are we measuring success? How are we actually doing these? How are we, are they out there on the chart? Are we making sure that we are actually doing these things? And I feel like, because there has been sort of a mistrust from the community to the board, what I would actually appreciate is that we get quarterly updates on the Parkside plan to ensure that, the actions that are happening that we have in the 4-year plan, that we get updates here at the board to make sure that they actually are happening. And if they're not, and I look to Mr. Ty because I can see right down the aisleway right there, yes. That if for some reason something's not happening, that you please tell us. I mean, of course, we'd love hearing from parents, and we all know we get tons of emails from all the parents. But, absolutely, we're here to help and make sure that, Parkside is truly successful. And one of the things that I really loved about the previous item, the demographer, that if you actually read between the lines, Sunnybrook and George Hall are going to be hit and going to be impacted, and we will have to expand those schools to accommodate the capacity. But the other thing is, we also have a growing Montessori program, which is a magnet school in the district, which draws from across the district. And if it was possible, my dream, and I'm sure all your dreams are, is that if Parkside was truly successful and truly a magnet, it would start drawing a whole bunch of students from around the district and offset some of that demand that's going to happen at Sunnybrook and George Hall. So just to reiterate, I would love for sort of a quarterly update over the next 4 years, and maybe in year 3 or 2 years, maybe it's every 6 months rather than every quarter. But I really just want to make sure that we are held accountable on this and that we are building the trust back that a previous board and previous administration maybe failed to do. So,
Can I chime in? So kind of, again, communication is huge. We made a committee because we really care about it. So in addition to quarterly updates, I just want to ensure that parents and community might receive more detailed updates on a consistent manner, like maybe every other month or something, just so so everybody's aware that we are making progress. Thank you.
Can I just add that this is why I was invoking the SIPSA process, because if the SSC at the site is holding that plan, working with teacher leaders and the principal leaders, they're engaged in that monitoring, and that should be part of the process of then communicating to the rest of the community how we're doing. You've heard me emphasize this in a number of ways, and like really trying to invigorate that process as the way that we hold the work and communicate it, I think is essential in this particular circumstance.
Yeah. So going off that, so I just want to say, and I'll be very honest, that I am the trustee that made the comment about, being concerned that we are focusing on the right things. We, as a board, have committed to really, ensuring equity in all of our schools, and we do have several Title I schools. And to be super honest, I wish that we had like very, very, very thorough plans like this one for all of those schools as well. And that is my concern. I as a leader in our school district and in our community, I want to make sure that, there are schools that have students that are really, really struggling, that don't have an amazing parent community that is able, that has the resources to advocate for them and their needs. And so to me, it's important for me to be able to say that openly, because I'm committed to being transparent. Not just that, but equity is really important to me. I feel like I live it. It's not just something that I pick and choose to talk about sometimes. Like, And so on that note, I agree that there should be quarterly updates. I disagree that it should happen in this space. I feel like, you have an amazing principal. I feel like you really need to collaborate with him. I know that there's not maybe trust built between the district and the school community just yet. But I think that, in order for that to really work itself out, like, there has to be, some steps in that direction on both ends. And I know that, there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And I do want to know how things are going. I don't feel like it should happen quarterly in this space, but it should happen more often than quarterly at a site level with your district, with your principal, in collaboration with district support. Absolutely. I want to make sure that we are also giving enough time and attention to the schools that have the highest number of students that need it the most. And I agree that, Parkside, in terms of achievement for the students, like, there are some concerns there as well. Absolutely. And that is something that we should be paying attention to. And I feel like you have a really amazing leader that's doing that, and that will continue to do that. And so that's how I feel about that. I do agree there's other processes and there are ways. I also feel like, just in terms of being, effectively collaborating, I'm just like, I don't want to put Mr. Tahai on the spot here, but I wonder, as a principal, how it would feel to have, like, this many, parents go to school board meetings and like, the advocacy is amazing, but also, like, it's kind of like going around him in a way, and he really is your leader. And so, and I know that you guys work well with him and you love him, and we love him too. But just in terms of really collaborating and partnering, I think that those things can happen, and they are happening, and they will continue to happen. And unless we're going to be giving special quarterly reports to several of our other schools, I don't feel comfortable having that happen. But maybe that's something that we can do. Maybe we can do it for a lot of different schools that really need it. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. And just in terms of the plan, I know that there isn't a budget here, and I'm curious, David, about how you'd envision, like, having this, be embedded into, like, the SIPSA or, the LCAP, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons you're getting, in effect, kind of a separate plan is because the original SIPSA that we wrote for this year obviously was primarily written last year, and as NEMA was coming on early this year, it was too early to say, to provide this kind of detail, these kinds of strategies. What I would expect is that then this goes right into the SIPSA. We could even talk about how this spring, the SSC could modify and incorporate the strategies that we noted are for this year, and then as they're planning the one for next year, it would be captured there with budget items attached to it. At the LCAP level, I'm very excited about the fact that we actually are doing a restart. We finished the 3 years. I'm going to get to shape the LCAP in a way that I think makes sense and calls out the fact that there's a bucket, you may recall, one of those slide decks from last year, where it was school programs, where we can very specifically say, we have Montessori programs, we have dual language immersion programs, we have an IB program, that kind of thing, and we can acknowledge the allocation of resources to those programs in those places that are much more transparent than the way we've, just would argue, have done historically. So you should be able to see it called out really explicitly, and I would ask you to hold me accountable to that.
We all will. Thank you.
Right. as kind of you guys folks were sharing and you guys were commenting, I kind of feel like it's important to talk about sort of where we came from and how we ended up here, right? Like this conversation started actually not related to the K-8 programs at either school, right? It came from some neighbors in the North Shoreview area that wanted neighborhood priority into North Shoreview. And at that time, instead of saying, okay, we're going to make an isolated decision about what should happen with neighborhood priority at this one Montessori school, this board said, hold on, let's actually look comprehensively. Let's go do community outreach. Let's engage our site leadership. Let's engage our parents. Let's engage our HOAs, our community members. Let's engage our site staff and teachers and really understand what's happening and what folks want, what's working, what's not working. Let's actually do our due diligence and listen and then make decisions, comprehensive decisions, not isolated decisions based on what we've learned. And so as a result of that came strong feedback that both sites wanted to maintain K-8 programs. And then this board and district said, okay, well, we're going to commit to doing that. And so, I say that as being important because I think it while there's been a history and there, are lots of things that have not worked, not just at Parkside, but at other sites in our district, I think what that process demonstrates is that as a board, we're committed to listening, to learning, to asking questions, to doing due diligence, to doing our homework. The district is committed to doing the same thing and to making decisions that are based on what's going to be best for all kids, what parents, what staff, what kind of all of our stakeholders feel is best and what we feel is going to be best for all of our students, and then acting on that, right? So then saying, okay, now we're going to engage in meetings with our site leadership, with our parents, with our community, in order to create a plan that's going to work, and we're going to put money behind it, and you might not have the dollar amounts right now, but there is a verbal and written commitment to those funds being available. And so just to say all of that to really, I just think it's important to kind of ground us in where we are and sort of like all of the steps that were taken to get us here, right? It wasn't just a kind of side conversation, right? This is a very intentional process. And so I think what you can expect is that we will continue to be intentional and thoughtful, and what we say is we're going to do, right? And so you might not have all the answers now, and you're not going to have all the answers now, and I'm not going to sit here and ask every question, that you guys have sent right now, because I agree with Trustee Corzo. I don't think this is the appropriate forum, and I think, as a board, our job is to set policy and to set direction. And so as a result of the feedback that we got, we said, okay, we're going to move forward in a K-8, and we have committed to supporting that structure at both of our sites. As parents, as community members, as teachers, as staff, as folks that are invested in your kids' education in our schools, you are our eyes and our ears on the ground. If something is not working, you tell us. We don't know everything that's happening at all of the sites. What you are getting from us now is a commitment to doing this. What you're getting from our district staff and your site staff is a commitment to making this happen and working with you and whoever else they need to work with in order to make it happen. And if it's not happening, then you let us know, and we will go from there. I agree with Trustee Corzo that, if we're going to do quarterly plans, then we need to be doing them for all of our schools, because all of our schools have things that need to happen. All of our we have sites that have significant needs. Parkside is one of them. But we have 20 schools that we're thinking about, and 12,000 kids that we are thinking about on a day-to-day basis and at every meeting that we're in. And so it would be unfair to our sites that don't have 20, 30, 40, 50 parents showing up and emailing us, say, okay, well, you're not going to get a quarterly plan because you didn't stand in front of this podium and ask us for one. And so if we're going to do it, we have to do it for all kids, because that is our responsibility. Right now, this is now in the hands of you. This is in the hands of your site leadership and your teachers and your staff and our district leadership that is committed to that. And I am confident that all of those people are going to make that happen. And like I said, if it doesn't, you know where to find us, and we will be here, to support that as you continue to move forward. But I'm looking forward to hearing with, this much power and energy and commitment to making it work for your kids and for your site. I'm really looking forward to seeing how things go, and, thank you guys for your advocacy and commitment.
Okay, any other comments? No? Okay, thank you so much. We are moving on to Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, Measure L and X report.
Good evening, everybody. Happy to share with you the next 3 items on your agenda are all positive, so that's great news. Sometimes we talk financials, lots of change and ups and downs, so these are all very positive. First item on your agenda is the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, and then Sheldon is going to share with you the district audit for 18-19, and then we'll talk about the governor's budget a little bit. So first of all, in regards to process for the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee report, you have been provided with the actual audit performed by Siobhan and Associates, and you also have a report from the Oversight Committee. The parameters are defined for the Oversight Committee in terms of what they need to provide to you. It's spelled out for them as well, too, and in their bylaws. And on a positive note, I should say, first from a process perspective, the Oversight Committee met with folks throughout the year. We're presented information, detailed reports, thanks to the staff members who presented all that information and put together for them. They reviewed those items multiple times throughout the year. And then the auditors actually work for the Oversight Committee. They come in and they do an audit of all the expenditures as well, too. And give them the findings from their report, too, that says essentially all the expenditures from an auditing perspective were seen that they were compliant with the language. And then the Oversight Committee, what their role is to provide to the public and say whether or not all the expenditures that were incurred were in line with the actual language of the ballot measure itself. And so they're obligated to provide a report that says when did they meet, what were their activities, and what were their conclusions. So in your packet tonight, you've been provided with the report from the Oversight Committee that says of the report of their activities, and they did conclude that all the expenditures incurred for both measures L and X during that fiscal year were all in alignment with the ballot language, so that's positive. And they received the report from the auditors first before they generate that report for you. So process-wise, they meet, they review, they have the audit, the auditors present to them, and then they generate their report to you. So they did provide you with a report. So it's a recommendation that you accept the information provided by the Oversight Committee, accept the reports generated by Siobhan and Associates. Okay? All right. And I'll have Sheldon come up and talk about the audit next.
Oh, did we move on to the next agenda item? No, I don't know. You have questions?
I just had a comment. I just want to thank you for the report and the work for the Oversight Committee, what they do. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next one.
Like it. Keeping us moving.
All right, are we ready? Yeah. June 30, 2019. So there's a lot of times I'll come up and I'll talk about things that drive people nuts, like deferred inflows and outflows and government-wide presentation, accreted interest, long-term debt, capital assets, fund balance. I'm going to do it again tonight. So basically, though, I'll try to keep it off the things that don't matter and focus on the things that do. And some of the things I like to talk about really have to do with what's the purpose of the audit. Well, the purpose is to make sure that the financial statements we presented as of June 30, 2019 are free of material misstatement. That's the main goal. That's the main objective, whether it be from noncompliance, errors, or fraud. That's our objective for the audit. Now, the audit actually occurs in 3 different phases. We come out in April, May, June to do the internal control work, document controls, test attendance, test some compliance, and really build the audit plan for phase 2, which is the substantive testing, where we're getting into the testing of the cash investments, capital assets, long-term debt, payroll, revenues, you name it, we test it. We do some follow-up work on state compliance, and we wrap up the 30-some-odd state compliance areas that we have to test. We also test uniform guidance test compliance, which is the single audit requirement. So if you expend federal awards of $750,000 or more for that fiscal year, we're required to identify major programs and test those major programs. Keep in mind the major programs can vary from year to year, or you might get lucky and get the same one over and over again. Just depends on how much money you spend and what the risk analysis tells us. So ultimately, we're going to issue some opinion letters along with this audit package. And those opinion letters are based on what the generally accepted auditing standards in the United States of America tells us to do. In addition to generally accepted governmental auditing standards, so you're a school district, you're a local government, and you fall under that. And again, uniform guidance, which I've said 3 times now because we have to do so much work under a single audit act, it drives auditors nuts. And then, of course, there's the Education Audit Appeals Panel Audit Guide. That's basically the State Controller's Office and the California Department of Education coming together and saying, hey, auditors, do this or else. Now, with all of that, what did we issue? What kind of opinion did we issue? What are the audit results? Sometimes when I do the PowerPoints that I have a couple fun ones, but I have a bald little accounting guy with a jelly bean counter kind. I've got one that says audit stamp approved. Then I have one that says audit stamp rejected. No one wants that one. You get the audit stamp approved because you have an unmodified opinion with no exceptions, no significant deficiencies, and no material weaknesses. Congratulations to staff, superintendent. Wait, was Patrick here? So no, good job again. Now, mind you, this is a year where I think I've talked at to this board in the past, and I mentioned the number of findings that we've had at some of our clients, 33, 40% in past years. This year, the findings were down for a lot of my clients. They've done a good job of implementing, which I actually think, is kudos to some of the newer, younger CBOs coming in. And also a little bit of help from the auditors, a little credit to us. But I will say there's one finding that's been prevalent this year, and it was the safety school plans. They weren't implemented at a lot of my districts on time. Didn't see the site cancels on time. And we didn't have that finding here. And that's a small one that just slipped by most of the districts. So you guys did a really good job. Would you like a few numbers? I'm going to throw a few numbers at you, and then we'll turn it over. Just because I feel like you only get to hear these one time a year from an auditor. All right, so PERS, right, pensions. 2015, these are approximate numbers, not exact. $2 million net pension $2 million annual required contribution in 2015. 2019, there was a $4 million annual required contribution for this district. For STRS, $4.5 million in 2015, $9.7 million in 2019. What does that mean? Because the numbers I just mentioned were your annual required contributions. Those have a direct impact on your fund balance, right? Audit terms, statement of net position, net pension liability, $18 million in 2015, $42 million in 2019. STRS, net pension liability, $60 million in 2015, $106 million in 2019. All right, so keep in mind that rate of increase from 15 to 19, exactly the same for every district in California that participates in STRS and PERS. So you're no different than anybody else. You don't really have control over those things, but I'll be here for the future. If you decide you want to invest in a Section 115 trust, I can help you with that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking about numbers except for one last thing. Your fund balance at June 30, 2019 was 6%. The minimum reserve requirement was 6%. Sorry, you had a minimum reserve of 6%. The minimum reserve requirement is 3%. So you exceeded that. So good job there, although there was a couple years of deficits, and the adopted budget was projecting a deficit again. So good and bad news. All right, I'll stop talking. Any questions?
No, but thank you.
Sorry, I do have a
Take it
question.
away, Ken.
The trust that you were talking about, can you just do a brief trust 101 on the pension liabilities? You talked about the 1115.
Section 115 trust.
Section 115 trust.
Yeah, basically what ends up with the Section 115 trust is you can actually set those up with different organizations. Right now, PARS is one of those organizations. And you can set it up for your pensions. You can set it up for OPEB. from an accounting perspective, I can be there to help you with that because it's considered a trust B or a side trust. And so it doesn't directly reduce your liability, but it also doesn't get lost in PERS and STIRS. What it ends up being is a cash with fiscal agent, so you get an additional cash line item in your balance sheet, and you get better returns on your investment because it pulls it out of that government code and that ed code stipulation related to your investments, which is liquidity, availability, and so you get better returns, and it's still safe on your investments, and so it's a little bit better of a long-term planning mechanism to help offset those liabilities.
Is that a very common?
It is right now. Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, that's what's happening right now. A lot more school districts aren't getting to that curve quite as quickly. Although some school districts, believe it or not, San Bruno City Park School District had invested in a PARS trust a few years back, didn't realize what they were doing, I think, but they did a really good move in doing that, had made a really good move in doing that. But school districts are a little bit behind it, but more so cities and special districts have made that move and are making that move. And so now we're starting to see the school districts start to make that move as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
As a former auditor, I just thank you for your hard work, and I don't have any questions, but thanks for all the reading.
Wow. Wait, are you the one that had the questions in the emails?
Yeah.
Awesome. I had a feeling it was an accountant of some sort. All right, thank you. Have a
Yeah,
good night.
thank you so much. Yay, accountants.
And that one you do need to approve.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the audited financial statements.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.
All right.
Governor's 2020 budget presentation.
Just really quickly, just to add on to what Sheldon was talking about, I did have a conversation with CalPERS recently about the OPEB. So like Sheldon was saying, just to echo that, a lot of school districts, not many school districts have had the opportunity to set aside funds to address that. But as Sheldon's saying too, you're seeing this curve getting bigger and bigger, right? So something to be mindful of and something we can focus on. It's a long-term strategy for the district too, to try and address that and offset that. And it's always struck me too that from an investment perspective that the economy has seen record returns, but we're just seeing this PERS and STIRS contribution getting greater and greater. So it's kind of so I'd like to see that go down, but we didn't see it go down. This governor's budget proposal, we thought we might see some change in there. So jumping into that, we didn't see any decrease in those obligations. Really quickly, format-wise, what school services does, these are some school services slides. They look at the macro economy, the national economy, they look at a state economy, and they start to zero down into school districts. So overall, very positive news for the state. But some slight tweaks in some of the funding, but overall very positive, continued growth, and there are some focuses of Gavin Newsom's, which are embedded in this too, focus on special education, preschool, early childhood education, but also a recognition too for funding for professional development and teacher-intensive mentorship programs and things like that. So we're going to walk through that really quickly, okay? So I'm sorry, the first slide was kind of the overall GDP national outlook, right, was 321, now it's 322 in terms of percentage growth they're anticipating. California economy here is talking about how the gross domestic product in California went from 3.5 in 2018 to 2.6 currently, and they give you some other data in here about really at a high level, cargo traffic slowing as a result of trade war, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, full employment, lowest unemployment in the history, right, of the country, right? So that's kind of the high level California economy. Now we drive into the low control funding formula. And there is a decrease in this percentage growth from what was anticipated, what was in your adopted budget. And so we'll make some tweaks to that. And I can also share with you too, if you'd like, I have on a flash drive what the low control funding formula Excel spreadsheet looks like with the 20 different windows in it. And I can show you how this mechanism works if you're interested in seeing that at the tail end of this, if you'd like to see it. But very simplistically, because you and we are a community funded district, although the LCFF and the statutory COLA is going from the 3% anticipated on 2.29%, what that's doing is you have your property tax growth is basically still seeing, for the current year, seeing about 8%. Next year is projected at 5%. This decrease in the LCFF base just puts you further into basic aid status because your property taxes are still growing, right? So, but this is a mechanism you have to go through to quantify that. This helps drive the conversation we have with the community too. And so there is a slight decrease in the 3% COLA. And also this talks about how the LCFF for the average district, what the average district should see in terms of overall growth. If you're interested in seeing that type of quantification of the growth we're going to see in ADA relative to our property taxes and relative to being a community funded district, if that's something you're interested in, we can talk about that tonight. That's certainly something I can share with you, okay? All right, these next couple slides really just go into the LCFF itself, and you'll see the different funding for the different grade levels, and these are the base grants, and this is a quantification of the 2.29% COLA. And then there's the other grade span adjustments are applied to the K3 and then 9-12, right? So, but this is also that quantification of what that growth is of the 2.29%. The K3 receiving a 10.4% increase, there's no modification in that percentage year to year, but it's just showing you a representation of what that receives as a percentage relative to that number, okay? And again, this is talking about the overall supplemental and concentration grants. We do have a quantification of supplemental funding for our district. So this is, again, there's no deviation from prior years of the LCFF of the 20% supplemental, and there's that quantification in that LCFF spreadsheet, which I'd be happy to share with you too, to show you where that's called out. Okay, so that doesn't change. This is also a quantification what that increase is relative to the 2.29% COLA that's applied, okay? So some of the shifts here, we're talking about the special education base rates. This is the conversation I was having with Dr. Drinkwater earlier and some other folks too, that for as long as I've been in education, I think AB 602 has been around for special education, right? The base formula. You see this last bullet here talks about the proposed repeal of AB 602 base formula would also eliminate the approximate $65 million special education deficit. This talks about how there's a shift of using the current base year AB 602 and walking towards a 3-year rolling average, right? For the quantification of the funding towards SELPAs, okay? And you'll see here too, there's an estimation of what this recalibration means for most districts in terms of what that funding is per ADA. This is still early on in this. We haven't seen a quantification of the exact impact to us, but this is what the January proposal contains, that there's this repeal of this, and then we'll see this as we walk down the path, work with the SELPA. We'll get clarity on it as we walk towards the May revise and as you walk towards your adopted budget. There's incremental funding for special education as part of this. We'll quantify that for you, okay? So that's kind of a big picture, a shift in AB 602. There's also a focus on funding based on preschoolers with disabilities and an allocation of $250 million of one-time funds in the governor's budget, right? So it's one-time as opposed to ongoing. So it's really important for us to distinguish that. So that's kind of some focus on, I know Gavin Newsom's still big, I think they call him the dad governor, that's what it is, because he's got young kids, right? So he's focused on this too, right? Okay. Addressing, and this is some shift now towards addressing California's educator shortage. Newsom highlighted that the most impactful way of improving student achievement is by improving the skills and abilities of educators who interact with them every day. So he supports the belief by proposing $900 million of one-time Prop 98 investment in the educator workforce, right, towards professional development, recruitment and retention, and expanding the classified school employees credentialing program. So pretty significant dollars, right? So that's part of his focus too, and that's his belief. Ongoing, the Educator Workforce Investment Grant Program, the quantification of what those dollars are and the different buckets you'll see here, right? Special ed, MTSS, English learner support, and that's a grant that we'd have to apply for. A couple other grants we'll highlight here for you as well. The community schools, we've talked about how this is a grant that with our new school, we can look at this schools are focused on student wraparound services, right? Professional development, increased family and community engagement, and extended learning time and expanded learning opportunities. So grant-based, we can focus on that as there's more clarity as we walk towards the May revise. Then we'll look at these things too, okay? And then some smaller dollar things, computer science is one, $50 million to LEA grants to help 10,000 teachers earn a supplemental computer science authorization, $2.5 million for County Office of Ed to serve as a repository for computer science resources, et cetera, right? So some smaller dollar grants that are available, and school nutrition seeing some increased funding, but not tremendous when you look at the overall state budget, okay? Mandate block grant, a slight tweak to that. Again, the COLA, our mandate block grant, as opposed to, all the different individual, historically to apply for all these different things, there's kind of this overall aggregate mandate block grant, and that COLA is applied to that too. So this is a quantification of that, okay? And then what's not in the budget, not increase LCFF targets, no reduction towards the CalSTRS and CalPERS contributions. And, the past couple of years, we saw some significant dollars in one-time discretionary funds given to districts. That's not in this either, okay? And again, like I said, as I know last time we talked about doing kind of this budget roadshow throughout the district, and I've done a lot of these over the years. I'm looking forward to that, to do that with you too. One of those things, as an example, we can walk through what that LCFF calculator looks like and share with people how it breaks down. In some ways, it's very, very simple for us. Again, there's like 20 different tabs, and I know Christine, and we go through these things in tremendous detail with the team, but it's really helpful because in some ways it's very, very simple. And one of you asked earlier too about the loss of enrollment, what that does to us. It conceptually and actually what it does for you is it's from an ADA funding perspective, you have a greater amount of funds to spend on a smaller number of ADA. Ken?
Sorry, I was just going to wait for you to finish because
Sure,
I want to ask
I'll keep talking. Please.
So I just want to make that clarification because we are I think last week or something, I had asked the question of how far we are into basic aid.
Right.
And you sent the report and we got it through and we're $8.3 million into basic aid.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a knock on school districts that basically say, hey, we see every pupil or every student as money. And so with the decline in enrollment, we are really concerned about it because all we do is just see money.
Mm-hmm.
But in our situation, because we're community funded, theoretically, that's not really the case.
Right.
As you had mentioned before, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, is that as we decline in enrollment, sort of our pot of money still stays up high because we're community funded. And like what you just said is that we have more money to spend on fewer students.
Yeah, and so that's correct. What I was thinking about, I'm sorry, but I was just kind of segueing into when Dr. Rosas and I earlier this week were talking to some folks from school services about the Prop 13 commercial shift. And years ago, when the state was in its worst crisis, community-funded districts, formerly known as basic aid districts, there was a discussion to shift property taxes across county lines. And in the California Constitution, that's not permissive. But when the state was in its worst crisis, that was an active conversation. The discussions that are underway currently associate with a proposition that is rendering tremendous support, and I'm hopeful to see a version of that materialize. But there are discussions also about whether on the commercial side there's going to be some shift of property taxes and redistribution of property taxes throughout the state, along the lines of trying to focus on the unduplicated counts, right? So there's still some discussion about that, and we're working with folks too that work with community-funded districts too to understand the complexities of that and the implications of that. So that was a segue to your question. Simply answer your question is yes, but there's also this conversation that's actually happening too about what's the most advantageous way for this proposition to move forward and render the support it needs to pass. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. You had a question, Ally?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did have a question. Well, not necessarily a question. I just want to say, like, I think Governor Newsom's doing some really important things for kids, but I am concerned about that there are no funds to help reduce CalSTRS and CalPERS. What do you think about how that will affect us?
Well, I think, Sheldon shared with you what your contribution increase has been, right?
Mhm.
And when it first began to increase, there was some real difficulties the state was facing. So there was a shift of this, I shouldn't say burden, but I'll say burden, this shift from the state to local school districts. Because the state was shedding their obligation and pushing it down towards school districts too. So, but again, I commented earlier too that it intrigues me that in the greatest growth in the stock market history that we've seen our contributions need to increase. So, I think we're going to continue to see some increases. That's what's in your multi-year. I don't know if it will plateau, but so I'm not really sure what's going to. I think it'll continue to increase in the short term. I'd like to think that from an investment perspective, that you'd see a decline. But you also read too about that folks are waiting for the steady, straight arrow going up like this in the stock market at some point in time to hit, right? You look at cycles, right? Recessions, and you come out of recession, right? So when's the next recession? So relative to your contribution for STRS and PERS, relative to when might the next recession be, there's concern because you saw this increase happen last time when there was this recession, and we're in this tremendously strong stock market now, and you're continuing to see your contributions. So if you hit a recession, is it intuitive to think that you might see those contributions grow even then some? But, we'll walk down the path, and at the end of the day, the sun's going to shine in the morning, and we're going to the doors, and kids are going to go to school, and we're going to figure it out, right? That's what we're here for. We're going to, no matter what the curveball gets thrown at us, we're going to figure it out, right? That's our job. So
Yeah.
that's our privilege, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And would it be incorrect to assume that, like, as our enrollment declines and our ADA, increases? I don't know, changes.
Mhm.
That wouldn't. Those are different funds, right? Like.
Well, so when your ADA declines, again, when you look at the every district in the state of California, when you look at this LCFF calculator, is comprised of, partially comprised of funding from their local property taxes, right? So it used to be that we talked about from revenue of districts, either be a revenue district or a basic aid district. When you looked at that circle and you see how much of that circle is filled up with property taxes, districts fill up, 50%, 75%, and basic aid districts, not community fund districts, when some of them, their property taxes are filling up that calculation in excess of that. And that calculation is very simple. It's ADA times that factor. When you multiply those two, you come up with an overall dollar. Say that you generate $50 million for districts. Some districts or property taxes are in excess of $50 million. Some districts are at $25 million. And so they are considered state aid dependent for that $25 million to get to that $50 million threshold, right? So when we see a decline in our ADA, when we come up with that factor that says we take a factor of the ADA number times that calculation you show up there, if the calculation now with decreased ADA, when you multiply out very simplistically, say as opposed to 48 million, we're supposed to get 50 million, but your property taxes are already in excess of 50 million, and your property taxes are continuing to grow. So what happens is you just get further into basic aid status. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I got that. I'm
Okay.
just wondering if, like, because in theory we would have more per student, but would it make sense, or would we even be able to use those excess funds to bring down, like, to add to our CalSTRS and PERS?
My own experience with having gone through in a basic aid district with declining enrollment, you hit it right on the head, which is that was coupled with increased costs in other areas, which were what we call them statutory benefits, right?
Mhm.
Statutory benefits, your workers' comp and your STRS and PERS, right? So SDI, things like that. So it's conceptually.
The kids won't actually get more money.
I mean, you'd like to think that's the case, but historically, it hasn't necessarily been the case
Mm.
because of other competing issues.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? No?
Thanks, everybody.
I had one. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sorry, Allison. Sorry.
That's okay. So for, just looking at the slides, so will our school district benefit from this increase? And I'm sorry if I missed it, for the special education rates?
That's what we anticipate. Exactly.
Okay, so you haven't yet figured out the.
It has to be
impact.
distilled, right? So
Okay.
this is the and cycle-wise too, Allison, right? So you have your January, and
Right.
I think on this, for that explicit slide that's up there too, there's a trailer bill that's going to be appended to that says, as for AB 602, Assembly Bill 602, right? So there's a trailer bill associated with this recommended repeal of that. Okay, so, and that's supposed to be in February. So we'll, as we walk towards May, January's introduction, trailer bills, we walk towards May when there's a May revise, and then your adopted budget by June.
And-
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. And
Okay.
I'm guessing similar to the increase for the Prop 98 investment in educator workforce.
Yeah. That'll
We'll
be.
know more as.
That's right.
Okay.
This is the proposal, and then we walk towards
I'm jumping the gun.
final. No, it's good. It's great. I should have talked about the process, so.
Thank
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to job description coordinator, child development. Sue?
Good evening. We're very fortunate in this district to have a wonderful preschool program that's been well received, and we're growing. And with experience growth, we're also seeing an increase in the number of mandates, number of regulations, which has taken an extraordinary amount of time. So, for example, we had the federal program monitoring, and Carrie Hazelton, our principal, spent weeks preparing for that, and then back to back, she had another audit that needed to occur. So in an effort to really not only have our program be compliant, but also we want to be able to enhance the instructional program. We want to be able to support the staff. We want to be able to help train to make sure that we are meeting all the needs of students as well as being in compliance. I'm bringing forth to you a job description for a coordinator of preschool position. This would be an administrative position to support the current principal at the site. And this would allow the principal to work with the coordinator to run the day-to-day operations, to provide additional support, to help meet the mandates, and just provide a higher degree of supervision and support overall to staff, students, and families. So I respectfully request that you approve the job description and the additional coordinator position for the preschool program.
Before we go into that further, I just wanted to also point out that the board has looked at ways to increase the viability of spaces to all students in our fee-based programs, for example. And we're looking at ways to integrate our programs and ways to improve and enhance what we're offering. So in conversations with Sarah Drinkwater and with Carrie and myself, we have been talking about how to change the program so that we can do sliding scales, so that we can have more integration, so we can do more inclusion. And these things are taking a lot of time. So it's not just the fact that there's, as you mentioned, 2 audits right in a row, and that does happen, and keeping up with compliance and mandates and program quality as it stands right now, but it's also to move the program. So we really have some desires about things we want to change. So that has led us to requesting a partnership for Carrie so that she has 2 of them to work together on these projects.
I guess one quick question and comment. So this is for one coordinator position, correct? That would, based on the job description, reports to Carrie. So then Carrie would be able to then move. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of echo what you just said, I think for me, kind of ensuring that, and I don't know if it means updating Carrie's position or what, but ensuring that I know we've asked for some pretty significant changes in our preschool program, and so if this allows for those things to happen, but I just want to make sure that by adding this position, that then Carrie really is focusing on that. So I'm not sure in terms of a next step if that would mean updating her job description or kind of what we can do to ensure that there's kind of like a loop back in terms of that.
So Carrie's position is actually principal.
Mhm.
So principal in our world does all of the kind of work we're asking her to do.
Okay.
So this coordinator could then take the more standard kinds of actions that take a lot of her time so that she can spend the energy on really moving the program. So, yeah, her job description fits the need.
Okay.
This would give her the ability to have the time to do the work.
I just have a confirmation question. The funds for this position is out of the fee-based program. It's not out of the general fund. Is that
No,
correct?
It's from state and fee-based program.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure that.
And the funds, the 179,243, that's the salary or?
It's
this
all
person?
costs, including pension and payroll and everything.
Okay.
I'm sorry, and the fee-based program does have the funds that are available. Otherwise, I'm
So this-
just confirming, thank you.
I believe, though, this is coming out of her state subsidized, isn't that correct?
It's both.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Both funds.
And yes, she did have the money.
Okay.
My favorite.
Everyone asked a lot of questions, which is helpful. I'm glad to see that it's bilingual preferred, because I know that there are a lot of Spanish-speaking kids in our subsidized program, and that would be great for them to have that language access. So, thank you. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the job description for child development coordinator.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, moving on to board member statements and requests for future agenda items. Anything? No? Okay. I will just say that I believe it's next weekend, we're going to the San Mateo County Equity Network
Yes.
sessions. We have a full day Saturday and then a full day Friday and then a half a day Saturday. So looking forward to that.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say Happy New Year to all the Chinese families out there and other Asian families who celebrate the Lunar New Year.
New Year.
Aren't you going to?
Hope so.
With the parade?
Oh, do you want me to answer? Well, I mean,
That's cool.
I think they extended the invitation to all of us, although I don't know whether or not we're all able to go. But I will be going with College Park to walk in the Chinese New Year parade in San Francisco, which will be fun.
Okay. Wow, this is like a first. No requests for future agenda items?
Got a lot.
You said plenty during the meeting.
Okay. Superintendent report and future meeting dates.
Okay, so I did want to tell you that the Foster City had given out their dictionaries, and I was able to tag along. And then I'm in charge of the Rotarian Dictionary Project for San Mateo. They purchased over 600 dictionaries for third grades in San Mateo. It doesn't go to every single school. It does go to 9 of our schools, and we did 3 today. They were absolutely adorable, wonderful children, just had the best time at the 3 schools today. They enjoyed looking at their dictionaries, looking up snakes and dinosaurs and spiders and all kinds of things. But one of the funniest things was that one of the little ones came up and said to me, "Well, who is the principal of your Rotary Club?" And so and we did laugh about that. So President Ann Campbell is the president of the Rotary Club, so now we're going to call her Principal Ann Campbell. So it was fun. It was a good time, and we're glad we could do it. So now you do have a number of dates in your books. I won't read it to you. Unless you had any questions, that's all I have for today.
That's right. And so we are not adjourning. We will be recessing back to closed session. But that does conclude our public meeting. Thank you.
Can't make this video. Anybody who's not recessing to closed session wants to sign a petition.
We should have a contest, y'all. You get more signatures.
Here you go, dear. Here you go. Sue, are you so sleepy? Sam Tam, this actually is a special one just for you. That would be the Oakland one, and we'll take just the signatures.
It's a challenge for me from there.
And I will come by again.
Thanks for doing that.